My friend, it is great to have you with us once again. College football season's getting close, and you and I need to have conversations.
Hey, Steve. Good to hear your voice again, my friend.
Same here. Everything changes now. Officially, Texas and Oklahoma in today in the SEC. Everybody else in the Pac-12 can't officially change until the 2nd of August, but everybody's in for intents and purposes. What did that do to how you have to put together the publication and how you were ranking players because of the additions?
Yeah, it made it very interesting. And, as far as ranking teams go, Steve, I've never had to rank an 18-team conference before with no divisions. So, there's going to be a lot of ties in the Big Ten this year. You've got 18 teams. You've only got 9 possible outcomes for the record. So it's going to be a lot of ties there. 16 teams for the SEC. Made it very unusual, very bulky as far as predicting the conferences and divisions go this year. As far as the players go, pretty much seamless to me. I think when you take a look at the Pac-12 last year, the Pac-12 was one of the best conferences in the country last year. So them sliding into the Big Ten is not like, let's say, the American Conference had a couple teams go into the Big 12 last year, and none of them really fared well. It's a different animal with the Pac-12 Big Ten, especially when you're taking basically 4 of the top teams from the Pac-12 sliding over. So the stats and things that the individual players did in the Pac-12, very comparable to what they'll do in the Big Ten.
Transfer portal means a lot in all this, so let's take a couple of transfer portal quarterbacks in the Big Ten. Let's start with Dillon Gabriel. He steps in at Oregon after going from UCF, doing well at Oklahoma, and then transferring to Oregon, where now Bo Nix is a part of the Denver Broncos. How do you view what he can do in that Oregon offense for Dan Lanning as opposed to what maybe Bo Nix did?
Well, I don't think he's going to match Bo Nix's numbers from last year. Those are pretty phenomenal. 45 touchdown passes, 3 interceptions, 4,500 yards total passing, 78% completions. However, when I talked to Coach Lanning, went over the team with him, he said he's a lot like Bo Nix in a lot of ways. He was very pleased with what he had coming in. He's a guy that has a lot of confidence. You can coach him hard. He's got a great attitude. He's humble. And he has produced, while not a 45-3 ratio, his ratio last year was an outstanding 30 touchdowns, just 6 interceptions. He had 69% of his passes. I think he'll thrive in the Dan Lanning offense, but I don't think he'll quite match what Bo Nix did last year statistically.
All right. Now, Ohio State is a group that for the most part has done the homegrown quarterback route. Will Howard's a part of this now, but my understanding was at Kansas State he wasn't assured of having that job with Avery Johnson there. What's the impact you potentially see with Will Howard in the Chip Kelly offense under Ryan Day?
I think it's probably going to be a good fit because you're going to see the quarterback run more in this offense. And I think they can afford that. Generally, if you're going to run your quarterback more, you cannot afford injuries. But they've got Devin Brown, and they've got a couple of very highly touted freshmen, Julian Sand and Aaron Noland in the back. So they are able to run him more, and I think that's when Will Howard is most effective. I do think Will Howard probably would have lost his starting job at Kansas State this year. But with the supporting talent he has, like a Travion Henderson and Quinshon Judkins at running back, with the receiving core they have, with the Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka, and the solid offensive line, I think he'll fit well in the offense. I just don't think he'll be one of those Heisman type of contenders.
Right, exactly. All right, now Penn State's gone homegrown with its quarterbacks. When you've had an opportunity to really examine the Nittany Lions, what do you like about the team? What are a couple of parts that give you pause?
Well, I do think you're going to see Drew Allar have a much better season this year. The team's got more confidence in him. He already had a 25-2 ratio last year. Yep. What I mean by much better, I mean throw for more yards. He threw for 2,600 yards last year. Definitely will top 3,000. And I like the depth they have at quarterback as well. When you look at Perbula and you look at Grunkemeyer, they've got depth there. The running back position didn't get the bang that you would have expected out of Singleton and Allen last year. I think they get that this year, so I like that a lot. And the offensive line, they could be up to last year's standards, but not quite as strength yet. So offensively, I like the quarterbacks and running backs. I still have question marks at wide receiver, Steve. It's really probably my biggest question mark on the team. Defensively, there's just a lot to like. When you look at the defensive line, I rate it second best in the country.
Yep.
Linebackers number 6, DBs number 9. Yes, they lose some players out of the secondary, but I like the replacements they have coming in. No questions about any of the 3 units on defense, and no questions about special teams. I rate it number 9 in the country. So I like pretty much the entire team. Question marks, major question mark at receiver, and a minor question mark on the offensive line.
Yeah, and I'll give you a name that I want you to watch, because obviously I saw your 4 teams on the All Big Ten, and this is the prejudiced announcer coming out here. Okay, okay, watch out for KJ Winston at the safety spot. Let's somewhere down the line, I think he may give you a thought about putting him on your teams. Okay.
Yeah, Coach Franklin told me he was an all-conference player, so he agrees with you 100%.
All right. So, but that doesn't mean we can't disagree on something. That's okay.
That's right.
And I may be too close to it. You know what I mean? As opposed to so there's differences. All right. So now, go ahead.
And when you follow one time, sometimes it's tough to. You got 16 teams in the league, so there's a lot of players out there. But I probably could have put Winston on that list. So I'm going to keep an eye on him, Steve. I appreciate that.
No. And believe me, I appreciate what you do. It was interesting years ago. I was doing the Outbound Bowl. Penn State was playing Arkansas. Arkansas had beaten Texas, and rather soundly, like 41-16 or some number in favor. And I asked Chuck Barrett, their play-by-play guy, I said, hey, Texas is coming in. How do you think they fit? He says, Oklahoma will fit fine. He says, Texas, isn't physical enough. In your opinion, has Texas in the last 2 years become a more physical team that can play in the SEC?
Yes, they definitely have. And, look no further than last year when they had guys like Tavondre Sweat up front along with Byron Murphy, very physical defensive tackle. In fact, that's probably the major question you have is who's going to replace those guys at DT. But they've got Collins and Broughton. Bill Norton they bring in from Arizona. They bring in a Louisville transfer and Jermaine Lowell. So they're physical up front. And offensive line, they've got one of the best offensive lines in the country. I rated number 2 overall. They also have the best quarterback room in the country. This is a Texas team that can come in and compete in the SEC right away. I rate them number 4 in the power poll and number 4 overall. And they get Georgia at home on October the 19th, so it's going to be a big game.
Yeah, exactly. It's amazing how Georgia plays at Texas before they ever play a game at Texas A&M, because they've never played a game at Texas A&M. They've been in the conference for 12 years. So it's the strangest thing. How they do their business is very interesting. Right, so now let's get to the Oklahoma part of it. Oklahoma's coming off one of those. They beat Texas, but they had one of those rather interesting seasons. Where do you see them standing with all new opponents?
Well, I'll give you 2 ways that I view Oklahoma, Steve. The first one is my power poll, which is the overall talent they have on the team. I rate them number 7 in the country. When you look at them, it's Brett Venables' 3rd year. I've gone over the team with Coach Venables each year, and you can see this defense is loaded this year. It's much different than when he first took over. And, his defenses are a little complex. 3rd year, these players all know it inside and out, led by Danny Stutzman at linebacker, Billy Bowman at strong safety. They're going to have a heck of a defense. Offensive line is probably my biggest question mark. They lose 5 offensive linemen from last year's team, but Bill Bedma is still there as the offensive line coach. He's one of the best in the country. And Coach Venables told me he feels good about the offensive line. Now, Jackson Arnold didn't have an overwhelming bowl game, but I think he will fit in well. And the receiving core and running backs are solid. So this is a very talented team. However, they draw the SEC's toughest schedule this year. They basically play all the big boys, with the exception of Georgia. They play Alabama, LSU, Ole Miss, Texas, Auburn on the road, Tennessee. So the SEC's toughest schedule. And it's the reason I only have them rated number 20 in the country in my actual preseason top 40.
Yeah, because I look at Jackson Arnold. I mean, I go back, I think it was the Alamo Bowl. He threw a couple touchdowns. He did some good things. He threw for over 350 yards, but he threw 3 picks in that game. Right? And I know it's only one game, but that's normally not what you see I'd like to see a little bit more out of him. What about you?
Yeah, that's it exactly. I was expecting him to really light it up in the Alamo Bowl. And as you mentioned, the yardage was there, the touchdowns were there, but 3 interceptions is something you cannot have. In fact, he had, in that one game, half as many interceptions as Dylan Gabriel threw in the entire season. But let's keep in mind he was a freshman.
Yep.
This is his first time on the big national stage, and now he's had a full year to work as the number 1 guy. So I think we'll see big-time improvement in that category, and I look for a much better ratio out of him this year.
Whenever we talked, Phil, about the playoff in the past, we'd say, who are the 4 teams? Now it's 12. So what are
You're not going to make me name all 12, are you, Steve?
No, I'm not going to make you name all 12. We're not going to I'm not going to do that. You know what? The reason I'm not going to make you name all 12 is I need people to buy the publication for you.
I appreciate that, Steve.
But when you look at it, where's the door open for somebody that hasn't been in it before or has maybe been in it once, and 12 gives them the opportunity to get there?
Let's. I don't want to sound like a hometown team here, but let's open the door with Penn State right off the bat. Right. Penn State's been landlocked behind Ohio State and Michigan in the Big Ten East for years. Now this year they avoid Michigan, they avoid Oregon, they avoid Iowa. They do have to play Ohio State, but they get them at home. And I think when you look at Penn State and James Franklin, they have the talent this year. There's some questions on I mentioned on the offensive line and receiver. All the other positions are loaded, especially defensively. They're number 29 in my experience chart coming in. And I actually have them favored in 11 of their 12 games this year. The only one I don't is the Ohio State game. So I think Penn State's got that opportunity to not only make the playoff, but make some noise as well. And then how about a team like Utah? Utah last year had 5 losses, so naturally nobody's really looking at them. They're not going to be in the preseason top 10 at the start of the year. But last year, Utah had a really tough schedule. They played most of their tough opponents on the road. They lost Cam Rising prior to the season, had a myriad of injuries during the course of the year, and they lost 5 games. But just 2 years ago, they were in the Rose Bowl. 3 years ago, they were in the Rose Bowl. Cam Rising's back, solid on the offensive and defensive line, moving to a new conference, the Big 12. And I think they can dominate the Big 12 and win it and then make themselves into the playoffs. And Cam Rising has proven he can play with the big boys in the big games. So I think Utah's a team that could make some noise. And maybe one more. I will go back to the Big Ten and pick on Iowa. I know Iowa hasn't had the offense in recent years, but they've got the defense this year. In fact, I expected a bunch of their defensive players to turn pro. They didn't. They all returned. Players like Nick Jackson, Sebastian Castro are back. They've got one of the best defenses in the country, one of the best special teams in the country, an offensive line that now has a veteran unit with almost everybody back. Cade McNamara, if he can stay healthy, and he wasn't even healthy at the start of last year, and wasn't healthy until he got injured. If he can have that year that you expected, they've got the running backs with Williams and Johnson. They've added some talent at receiver. They may actually have an offense to go with the defense and special teams. And then when you look at their schedule, Steve, who do you put them an underdog at this year? I mean, the road games are at Maryland, at UCLA, which is in down year, at Michigan State, at Minnesota. All those winnable. You would put them an underdog at Ohio State, but the Vegas total on them coming into the year is 7.5. Find me 5 losses on that schedule, Steve.
I can't, and also the Tim Lester effect as the offensive coordinator is going to be interesting with them. And they have put themselves in an interesting position because they have locked in 25% of their schedule forever because they have guaranteed games with Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Nebraska because the Big Ten asked, who do you want to be as your rivals? You could have up to 3. They took all 3, so they've locked in 25% of their schedule and 1/3 of their Big Ten schedule in perpetuity.
Wow, that is interesting, and that's. I think they're really set up this year. As mentioned, I thought a lot of their players were going to turn NFL, much like Ohio State. Ohio State had a lot of players come back that could have gone. Watch out for the Iowa Hawkeyes this year.
Yeah, that's right. With Ohio State, Jack Sawyer could have gone, stayed. JTT could have gone, he stayed. Burke could have gone, he stayed. Those are all on the defensive side. And then there's, when I look at Cam Rising, for example, I'm the guy that was announcing the game when he got hurt. So I saw the play and called the play. But when I watched him on the video, and then when I saw him in person, he's a really good college quarterback that has a swagger to him that you can only define if you watch him play. And I think that makes a big difference because they play a power style that the Big 12 is going to have to get used to.
Yeah, absolutely. And, last year, if Rising went down, you expected Brandon Rose to step right in and take his place. He was one of the higher-rated quarterbacks at the high school, big arm, mobile. He had got injured in the preseason, so they were down to their number 3, number 4, number 5 QBs during the course of the year. And basically, teams could load up the box and stop them. And as mentioned last year, a bunch of their big games were on the road, where you get to Rice-Eccles Stadium. I don't know if you've ever been there, Steve, but it is one of the loudest venues out there. They've got the students, or they're called the MUSS, M-U-S-S, and it's the student section. They get most of their tough games at home this year, so they're a team to look out for.
Yeah, have not. And that's a place I want to go. I do have to ask you about Alabama with Kalen DeBoer. It's been interesting with them, and now when you talk, I'm sure you talked with him as well. What was the impression he had of his team? Because it's not as if he's never been to a national championship game. Last time I checked, that was January.
Absolutely. And I got to be honest with you, Steve, when Nick Saban stepped down, I remember all those folks hit the portal, big-time names going in the portal. I'm like, okay, maybe Alabama's in for a rebuilding season. But talking to Coach DeBoer and going over the team with him, first of all, it's a talented team, really good roster, and he brought in some players like Parker Brailsford. Remember they had snapping problems at Alabama last year. A lot of bad snaps during the year. Solved. They brought in the Joe Moore Award-winning center, Parker Brailsford, to handle that. In the secondary, they lost some key players, but they bring in a Damani Jackson from USC, a Keon Saab from Michigan. So they're in good shape there. And going over the squad with them, I feel they actually have more talent on this year's Alabama team than he had on last year's team that played the national title at Washington. And keep in mind, he's 104-12 as a head coach. And my first question to him, Steve, was what's it like taking in this, filling the shoes of a legend? How tough is that? And he says he can handle it, and he's pretty confident about that. So I liked everything about going over the squad with them. We talked for at least an hour going over the team, and I think they're going to be a surprise contender. I think a lot of folks are writing them off because Nick Saban's gone, a lot of talent left, but they have a lot of talent there, and Kalen DeBoer can sure get it out of them.
Beware of an Alabama team that you're like, okay, we're okay now. Beware. I know Caleb Downs is with Ohio State, but Saab's a good player. Came in from Michigan, I believe, if I remember correctly. Yeah. So, hey, absolute pleasure. This went by in a blink as usual, and we will catch up again, I hope, before the season starts.
Well, we better, Steve. I mean, as you mentioned, I could have swore we just got on the phone here, and we're done with it already. So, yes, we should definitely do this more times.
Thank you, Phil. You're the best. And, again, his publication, get it. And the primary places they can get it would be?
The only places you can get it are Barnes & Noble and Books A Million. Those are the only two places that you can go out and get it. So save your gas money. Barnes & Noble, Books A Million exclusively, or philsteele.com. And when you go to philsteele.com and get the hard copy, we give you the digital copy for free, and we actually update the digital all the way through September. So Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, philsteele.com.
Absolutely. Phil, thank you so much. We'll talk soon.
Sounds good, Steve. Have a good one, my friend.
You too. The great Phil Steele.
Yes, indeed. As always, it is my great pleasure to be here.
All right, so I want to start with the quarterback part of it, because no matter what we talk about with the Steelers, we haven't talked about it a lot. Russell Wilson, in some ways, this is like a rehabilitation assignment along the way. When you watch the Denver version of Russell Wilson, what do you think actually needs to be rehabbed on him in terms of his game?
With Wilson, and I know Steelers fans have not liked hearing this since it happened, but there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. But I wouldn't say he needs to improve this as much as he can't do the stuff that they were asking him to do in Denver.
Mm-hmm.
I think the results are pretty obvious. If you watch him game to game, don't look at the stats. If you watch him game to game, he made a lot of mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't see plays happening the way they were drawn up. That was the frustration from Sean Payton. He made a lot of mental mistakes, stuff that go with their record are not acceptable for a quarterback in the NFL.
Right.
So they need to. I hate to use the word simplify, but they need to incorporate the things that he can do. And if you look at it in Denver, you're going to ask yourself, well, why didn't Sean Payton do that? Well, because he's Sean Payton, and they signed him for $20 million a year and probably had more sway within a new ownership group than the quarterback did. So I think a lot of what Wilson can do, he can throw the deep ball well, he throws it down the seam well. Have him be able to read a play as it's developing, probably fewer just quick one-hit reads. Let him see the play materializing in front of him. And that really means you need a little bit deeper of an offense. That's not something we've seen in Pittsburgh a whole lot lately, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
To me, I think you have a good marriage of the skill set of a quarterback from the past with an offensive coordinator who can scheme around that concept from the past. So in a way, it's almost a reclamation project, both for Russell Wilson and Arthur Smith. I think in that they need to run things that don't have as much complexity, but are allowed to develop a little bit more to give Wilson the feel that I think he was lacking when he was in Denver, if that makes sense. He
Sure.
didn't have rhythm. He passed on things earlier in plays rather than later, which is, the primary receiver is this. That's where the ball needs to go. He doesn't really operate well like that. I think he's going to get the sense of where the ball needs to go in his mind, and you need to be able to create enough options for him to be able to do that. And to be successful with that, a lot of trust that needs to take place. Probably going to be saying you can't make an omelet without breaking any eggs. He's going to. I think he's going to have a few turnovers and a few frustrating situations where a play could have been made, but he passed on it for something else. They have to establish that trust, and they're really going to have to kind of let him go. I think that's why they made a thing of saying Russell Wilson's the starter. We brought him in. This is our guy. I think they need to build that up. I think to get the most out of him with a new offense, he's going to have the freedom to do the things that it has worked for him in the past. He had some success here and there in Denver, but not really enough game to game playing within a very rigid structure. He needs to be able to get the ball down the field when those opportunities are there, and he needs to be able to lean on a running game to set up a lot of the movement, a lot of the play action stuff that he's used to running. I think that's exactly what they're going to do. It's in my mind, it's a great fit. It's a question of how well they can blend together for who they are now versus what they've shown in the past.
Right. So now let's get to the Justin Fields part of it. With the new kickoff rules, it's at least been floated that he might be a part of it. So we'll start with two parts. Number one, let's start with the kickoff rule and your thoughts on it, and the idea that maybe Justin Fields is a part of it.
Let's start with the second one first. Whatever reason that came up and the manner in which it was kind of broken to the world, I think might have been taken a little bit more seriously than what they thought. At the same time, though, when you have the space that you're going to have to operate to set blocking up, good open field runners are good open field runners.
That's right.
So while I don't think there's a way in the world Justin Fields is going to go for being a kick returner, I do think you're going to see the teams that want to be the most creative with this having the most success, to a point where, there probably is a bet that I could make on this. I wouldn't mind dropping $100 on there's going to be 3+ kick return touchdowns in week one. Mm-hmm. It's crazy, I know, but no, I think it's one of those things that
I agree with you.
You're going to understand how to run it far better than you're going to understand how to cover it in week one, coming out right away. It's very different. It's unique to this game, obviously. It makes sense for where they want to go as far as limiting, high-speed, violent contact and it's not like anything that we have seen at the NFL level. So some people are going to be well ahead of the curve on this, and some people are going to be way behind the curve. We're going to see that quickly within the framework, at least the first couple weeks of the NFL season.
That's right.
I think Justin Fields could be effective within that. He's a great open field runner. He has great feet. He's very quick. He sees what's coming at him. In fact, I would even argue a good running quarterback would have success with this because it's very similar to the kinds of stuff that they break consistently. And Fields, for as big as he is, obviously he's fast in a straight line sense. He's not Lamar Jackson, but he's twice as big. He's really, really quick. He's very agile. He's great at eluding defenders in the open field, and that's really what this is going to be. There's a lot more space to work with. They're not going to have as much time to close in around somebody, which is what you do on a kick return. You're staying in a lane until you're breaking in to converge on whoever's carrying the ball. This is going to be much more straight ahead running, and with that, I think somebody like Fields could be effective, just in a theoretical sense. That said, there's absolutely no way he's going to be returning kicks. Fields, oddly enough, just like Wilson, they're both in contract years. So they're not going to put themselves into a position to unnecessarily risk injury. Obviously, nobody's talking about Wilson doing this. I just mean Fields, the position that he's in. He's a free agent next year. So he wants the opportunity to throw the ball. He doesn't need to show anybody else that he can run it anymore. I can't imagine he would be on board with it. To the point where I don't think it was even serious. I think it was just something they floated as he might be the best open field runner on the team. That's the type of guy you want back returning kicks right now.
Okay. I mean, it's fair enough. I mean, I completely understand that as to what the thought process happened. But I think it's at least an interesting. You're right. The kind of runner you want to have back there. That part I completely get. Because that's the kind of guy you want to have in terms of the ability to get in the open field. You'd love, for example, to put Lamar Jackson back there. I mean, he'd be something in that.
Yeah, for the same reasons. You look at how quick he is. I mean, really, there's a difference between to the sideline. I jokingly tell a Browns friend of mine this, the Baker Mayfield speed, a guy that can get out of the pocket and can reasonably get you 4, 5, 6 yards, angling to the sideline.
Right.
That's Baker Mayfield isn't slow, but he's not fast.
Right.
Lamar Jackson is side to side, all gaps, all distances fast. You get a guy like that in this situation where he has both his left and his right to move. He would be dangerous. In this situation, I think at the same time, I think it's common sense. If Lamar Jackson has 10 yards of runway and you're coming at him straight and he can elude you to his left or his right, he's going to make some guys look stupid. He's going to break some ankles and he's going to make some plays. He absolutely would dominate in this. Now, that's not to say that there are not very shifty, very fast other players that might not have the franchise values that Jackson does, that you don't need to put back there. But at the same time, there is an instinct behind this, and I'm not even sure if it can be defined. But it's athleticism plus vision, creating some type of preternatural anticipation. There's an instinct to running in the open field, and Lamar Jackson might be the best that we've ever seen, at least since Barry. Since Gale Sayers, these were guys that knew where somebody was going to move before anything would happen, and they could set it up, break at the right time, and make guys miss. Jackson is that level of a runner that in something like this, I mean, it'd be fun. I totally get that there's no way they're going to do that, but I would enjoy watching Lamar Jackson in this kind of scenario. In fact, I hope in Madden 25 that's an option that's available. If I could have Lamar Jackson return kicks, maybe that'll actually compel me to play with the Ravens. I'm not sure. We'll see how that goes. But Jackson's a phenomenal runner, and this structure is going to open that up for lower level roster guys that need to do something to make a roster spot. And I think the kick returner is going to be a significant part of this upcoming season. And again, I'll say this throughout training camp and into the preseason, the teams that get this, the teams that can execute this, are going to be factors as the season goes on, because it's so different. There really isn't a whole lot to draw from. There are ideas, there are theories. Some will work really well, some won't at all. I think you're going to see a huge gap between the good ones and the bad ones. And that's going to be the factor in a lot of games this season.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right about that. It is going to be. What kind of players do you need to cover this? And do you change as to how you block it because of what the alignment happens to be?
That's one of the more convoluted things I think you're going to find. I've talked to a few people involved with special teams at various levels. They'll all give you the confident answer like they know what they're talking about, but it sounds a lot like the same as what they would do before. And it doesn't account for a different spacing. It doesn't account for the fact that blocking can't be the same. It's much more one-on-one. So really, what you're typically looking at is your linebackers, guys that can run with a good amount of speed and plug holes, fill lanes, get in the way until there's the big, kind of violent crash and the bodies fall everywhere. Right. This is a lot more one-on-one. So in a way, it's almost like they're going from, real hard on the blocks, low post play basketball to today's open-ended hit the three, corner three, transition three, something that's much more spaced out. It's much more one-on-one. They have not ever played special teams like that. So the right fit in my mind would be if you've got, to block, if you've got an offensive lineman that can run to a spot very quickly and get in the way of somebody that's going to be far quicker, be able to get inside their body and move them. In other words, it's either going to be a loss or a touchdown in a lot of ways if you have too many of those guys. You've got to be able to balance it out. And you're still doing all that with the constructs of a 53-man roster. They're still going to value the third-string linebacker, over perhaps the third-string tackle that they need on game day in certain situations. It's going to come down more to offense and defense than it will specifically special teams, minus your core special teams guys. What I mean by that is the advantages, I think, are going to be much more obvious, and guys are going to be playing, in a sense, out of position in a way. I would think the guy coming down, they have to break off blocks, straight up blocks, elude them as opposed to overpower them. They're going to have rip, swim, all of those, dips, all of those kinds of moves to be able to get past the guy blocking them, because they're not double teaming. They're not going to have the space to be able to do that. In that, I think it's going to take a different player. They're going to have to be trained differently than what they've done. And the NFL, they don't spend a whole lot of time on special teams gunners. And they don't do this in college at all. So I don't even know. I think some people are going to take to it really well. Some coaches are going to take to it really well. But I think some are going to be absolute disasters as well. And that's going to create some significant plays and games. And we're not really going to understand why until we see it live. Maybe not even in the preseason. We might have to wait till the regular season to really flesh out what coaches want to do. But it's a much more heightened strategic part of the game, I think, than it's been in the past. And as a special teams dork, I think it's going to be fun. I enjoy the strategy that goes into it, why they're doing it, how they're doing it. There's a lot more emphasis now than there's been in the past. And I'm not even sure who's going to be great at it, but I'll bet there's going to be a stark difference between the ones that are doing it the best and the ones that aren't.
I'm glad you brought up the preseason, because the preseason, look, a bunch of different guys play. You're paying, you're just wasting money if you're going to a preseason game unless you're a real diehard in terms of people you want to see. But when it comes to this, can you see teams putting out their best players right away because they need to see how it works in live competition?
That's what I mean, though. It's I'm choosing my words carefully, but NFL coaches have earned the right to allow themselves to think that they know everything.
Right. Yeah.
And I just call it life experience. Very rarely do you know everything about something you've never done before. So I think the humble ones are going to recognize this is way different. They're going to need to see it. Yeah. And we can look at it in training camp all day long. It's, you wouldn't have preseason games if you honestly felt training camp was the only thing you needed to do. The financial piece of it, I guess, that counts. But you're going to have to put guys in different situations, and you're really going to have to break them down individually. Are you going to put your kick return one team out there right away? Maybe you get them a couple snaps, but a lot of it is going to be mix and match different guys and kind of try to isolate them as individual competitors to compile the idea of what they have in front of them, what they need to work on, what worked and what didn't. Mm-hmm. I just think, honestly, in a lot of ways, preseason in particular, I think it's going to be a gong show. There's going to be a lot of crazy stuff that happens because there's a lot of things that you can do with this. And I, with all due respect to Danny Smith, for example, Steelers special teams coach, who forgot more football today than I will ever learn in 5 lifetimes. But there's no way he has a great sense of how this is going to work week 1 against Atlanta. There's just no way that's possible. And I'll bet he's going to be the first one to say that. They have a lot of ideas, but without being able to execute them in real time, real competition with the real officials on under the stadium lights, I don't think they know fully what they're getting into. But I also think Danny Smith is the type that can excel with this sort of thing. Maybe the Steelers are ahead of the curve in that regard. They're not going to truly know that, though, until they've got official uniforms on going up against a live opponent, whether that's preseason or week 1, to be honest. I would think the more reps, the better. That's just me.
Well, having you on every week is my choice. That's just me.
Well, I'm happy to be here. I'm glad you keep calling back.
Yeah, well, believe me, we need you. Thanks so much, my friend. Have a great one. We'll talk next week.
Definitely. Thanks for having me.